Tonight, gatherings restricted to 2 people to slow the spread of coronavirus.
The strong advice is don't gather together in groups. That's the simple way of putting it. Just don't do it.
The PM announces a moratorium on evictions from rental properties for people facing financial distress. 2 more deaths from coronavirus, bringing the national death toll to 16. And forced isolation, the first plane loads of passengers escorted onto buses and into hotels. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Kathryn Robinson. National Cabinet has wrapped up its latest meeting, agreeing to further restrict public gatherings to just 2 people. The Prime Minister has announced public playgrounds, outside gyms and skate parks will be closed from tomorrow. Scott Morrison says people aged over 70 should isolate at home as much as possible.
This does not mean that they cannot go outside. They can go outside and be accompanied by a support person for the purposes of getting some fresh air, some recreation, but they should limit contact with others as much as possible. These arrangements should also apply to those with chronic illness over 60 and Indigenous persons over the age of 50.
Now, the Prime Minister also announced the states and territories will move to put a temporary ban on evictions from rental properties for people who are facing financial distress.
There's no rule book for this. We are in uncharted territory, but the goal should be shared, and that is a business that can reopen on the other side, not weighed down by excessive debts because of rental arrears. A landlord that has a tenant so they can continue into the future to be able to support the investments that they have made. And banks that have clients, both the landlords and the businesses, the 3 of them working together to ensure those businesses can get through and be there on the other side.
Well, Australia's death toll from coronavirus has risen to 16, with almost a third of the victims connected to cruise ships. Earlier today, the government unveiled another $1 billion emergency package focused on remote GP consultations, mental health and domestic violence support. Here's senior correspondent Philip Williams.
Despite the deep corona gloom, the first glimmer of light.
This time last week, the rate of increase on cases was up around 25 to 30% a day. That rate now, over the last few days, has fallen to about 13 to 15%.
The Prime Minister announced another $1 billion+ boost, this time for physical and mental health. $669 million will be spent on a new telehealth system. That means, where possible, doctors will consult via FaceTime or on the phone. No need to leave home or for doctors to use scarce protective equipment.
It will significantly reduce the demands on personal protective equipment, PPE. We know PPE is in very much short supply.
Prioritising your mental health is important.
There'll be a $74 million boost for mental health services, with extra money for helplines for those in distress.
It is a down payment on our nation's mental health. We know we will need more than $74 million, but it is a great start.
There'll also be $150 million to combat an expected surge in domestic violence, and $200 million for charities to help feed and shelter the poor. Another day, another billion, and there are plenty more to come. The mother of all packages is still being worked out, aimed at keeping businesses and workers supported and viable. A wage subsidy of some description is almost certain, and this plea from the Prime Minister to employers about to throw in the towel.
I would ask that before you make any further decisions, that you take the opportunity to see the further measures that the government will be announcing.
Get on with it, put these changes in place, because the longer there's uncertainty, the more the anxiety that's there.
The harder, faster message not embraced by the Prime Minister, who says comparisons with actions in other countries simply don't apply.
I mean, in China, they were welding people's doors shut. That might be okay with them.
For now, some doors in this country remain open, but for how long? Philip Williams, ABC News, Canberra.
The Prime Minister says the early signs of flattening the curve look positive. Since the start of March, we've gone from 28 cases to nearly 4,000, a very steep increase. But when you look at the past week, the rate of increase has dropped from around 25 to 30% per day to the low teens. The PM says that's evidence some of the stricter measures being put in place, including shutting gyms, clubs and pubs and gathering limits, seem to be working.
We have the cooperation from the Australian people, then that obviously in turn has an impact on how we're managing the spread of the virus.
When it comes to testing, Australia per capita is one of the best in the world. More than 209,000 tests have been carried out, with more than 98% of them coming back negative.
What that really means is that with the 3,809 cases reported to us, we have one of the broadest and most reflective testing regimes.
Australia's death rate is well below 1% of those confirmed cases. Well, they were scenes unimaginable just a few weeks ago. Thousands of Australians rushing home from overseas to be met at the airport by the Army and then bussed to hotels under police guard. The Commonwealth quarantine of overseas travellers came into effect at midnight, forcing all arrivals into isolation for a fortnight. But, as Ashley Raper explains, not everything went to plan.
Back in Australia, but the country they've returned to is very different.
Was it a surprise to see the Army here?
Yeah, just nice to be home. This is the new national regime, enforced from midnight. Inside the airport, all arrivals are screened before being sent to mandatory quarantine.
I think it's good.
It'll be fun. But some anxious relatives watched on. Andrew Cowling has grave concerns about his 85-year-old father.
I don't know how any of this is going to be managed by the government in any way. They've got dietary requirements, health requirements, and they're locking them up in a hotel.
Raj Kumar wants his 19-year-old daughter at home to self-isolate.
I'm very frustrated, I'm very angry. What's going on? I just come here to pick her up.
Young and old, everybody had to get on board. The first busloads went to Sydney's luxurious Intercontinental.
Are you ready to quarantine whole family in one room?
It's going to be interesting.
Others remained stuck on the buses.
Sitting outside the Intercontinental, but unfortunately 3 hours have now gone.
And then they were sent elsewhere.
And we've been directed to go to the Ibis. So something pretty seriously wrong has been happening with getting people into the Intercontinental.
Finally, Peter O'Connor made his destination.
Well, after 5 hours out of the airport, hanging around the Intercontinental in a bus, and now good old-fashioned Ibis. This is basic. Mr. Prime Minister, I hope you know what you're doing.
That's where he'll stay for 14 days, fed, housed and isolated like the other thousands of Australians returning home.
And if they in any way try to avoid that, they run the risk of an $11,000 fine and a 6-month jail term.
There's a reason the government is enforcing hotel isolation, because like other attempts at social distancing, some people simply weren't getting the message. Authorities were flabbergasted when a group of 33 doctors landed at Sydney Airport from Chile on Friday and dodged police to board domestic flights instead of checking into a hotel as directed.
I actually don't know what to say about those doctors. They are the people who you would expect to know better than anybody else. So yeah, it's bitterly disappointing.
So was this.
Evacuate now.
A fire alarm forcing people isolated in one hotel back onto the streets. Ashley Raper, ABC News, Sydney.
Well, I'm joined now by Kate Evans, who returned home today to Australia after 2 years living in the UK and is currently in isolation at the Ibis Hotel in Sydney. Kate, before we get you to take us through what the last day has been like for you, welcome home, and how are you feeling?
Thank you. Jet-lagged, tired and a bit bored already, even though I've been in this room for about 6 hours.
OK. Can you take us through the process from when you landed at Sydney Airport?
Yeah, so when we landed, we got up to board and then were told that it would be another hour before we were allowed, so not to board, to depart. Was told it'd be another hour before we were let off the plane, so I had to sit back down again. Kind of sat there in limbo for about half hour. Were allowed off the plane. Eventually got screened, 2 meters distancing. My temperature was a little high, so I had to get my temperature taken again. Get down was fine. Got bags. Got ushered through security onto coaches, which were about 15 or 16 people per coach. We were not told where we were going. Driven around the city. We were outside the Intercontinental for a couple of hours on end before we were told that it was taking too long to get people in and screened and checked in. We got sent to the IBIS, and then we were sat on the bus for about 3 hours outside the IBIS before we were allowed in by police, and they escorted us to our room, and yeah, I've been patrolling the halls from what I gather.
So, Kate, can you try and tell us why there was so much delay? Was it because you were all being screened once again? Why was there such, firstly at the first hotel and then at the second one, the IBIS, where you landed?
I am not sure. I don't think anyone has a very good idea of what's going on, including the driver had no idea. There was an airport security lady on our bus. She didn't really know. They just said that the Intercontinental was taking too long to screen, so we'd have to go elsewhere. When we got to the IBIS, there were 2 buses ahead of us, and we couldn't even see what was going on, or were told what was going on. Had to get off to go to the bathroom and was escorted by a police officer, which was a very weird experience. But yeah, they were just, the hotel staff didn't really know what was going on. I asked what was going to happen at the end of 14 days, and she said she had no idea. So I think everyone's kind of playing it by ear, hour by hour at this point.
Well, so now that you have been allocated your accommodation for the next 2 weeks, what information have you had about how the next 14 days will play out?
We were given a little letter package from the New South Wales health government. We were told that we'd be fed, and we just weren't allowed to leave our rooms. And yeah, we were given some mental health lines and everything, because obviously everyone's going a bit stir crazy in here. But so far it's a bit limited as to how much we go.
Do you have a window, a balcony, access to fresh air where you are?
I do not. I have a window, but it is not able to be opened. I have a view of some buildings across the street.
So what was the general feeling amongst those that were in your cohort being bussed about from hotel to hotel? Were they fairly well behaved, or was there a fair amount of anger rising amongst all of them?
At the beginning, everyone was kind of in jokey high spirits because, we're all in this together, and I mean, what can be done at this point? You kind of got to treat it its best. But once we finally, 5 hours on a bus after you've been, I'd been travelling for about 33 hours before that, so I was pretty annoyed at that point. So everyone was just kind of exhausted, just wanted to know what was going on. Everyone was a bit frustrated that we're having to be isolated in separate rooms because we've all been on a flight together and a bus together. So if one of us has the virus at this point, probably all have it. We're not allowed out to exercise, no common areas. So I think eventually it turned into frustration.
We saw in the story before we played, before we spoke to you, that there were concern amongst relatives in that they're concerned for their relatives who are in isolation, who might not be cared for as they perhaps might care for them at home. Do your parents or your relatives have concerns for you? Would they prefer you to be outside, or do they pretty much well understand this need for self-isolation?
So my mum's actually in midwifery, so she's still an essential worker, so I think she is not exactly happy that I'm in isolation, but understands for her and the hospital that's a bit better. They do want to send a care package, which I hope is allowed, because someone ordered pizza next door, so I assume it's fine, and just kind of FaceTiming and messaging as much as possible to keep spirits up. My brother thinks it's a great deal that I'm getting food and wine off government money, so...
Okay. And Kate, finally, how do you plan to ride out the next 2 weeks? Have you set yourself a bit of a plan, or do you intend to do that? And if so, what might it look like?
I haven't really set a plan at most. I got in, I unpacked, and then I fell asleep. We are given $25 a day for beverages, so honestly, part of this will probably be getting a little drunk. and reading a lot. An old PT sent an exercise routine to do in a hotel room, so if worse comes to worse, I will exercise.
All right, well, Kate, keep your spirits up, stay well. Thank you very much for joining us. We will no doubt check in with you over the next 14 days. Kate Evans, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, overseas now, and Donald Trump has backed away from a proposal to close several state borders, including New York, despite the infection rate climbing. State governors slammed the radical plan, and the president now says he will issue a strong travel advisory. North America correspondent David Lipson reports.
Adorned with flags and much fanfare, the US president sends comfort to struggling New York.
This great ship behind me is a 70,000-ton message of hope.
The hospital ship will arrive in 2 days to help ease the crushing burden on New York's health system. Video posted on social media shows emergency rooms already near breaking point.
Who's the sickest patient needs to go? I don't know.
Fearing much worse to come, under-resourced healthcare workers are publicly pleading for help.
If you have any face masks, supplies, please consider donating them.
The president spent the day publicly weighing up whether to seal off 3 states to slow the spread of infection nationwide.
We'll be announcing that one way or the other fairly soon.
It took the New York governor by surprise.
Have you had any indication that that's a possibility for New York or parts of Connecticut?
I haven't had those conversations. I don't even know what that means.
By day's end, President Trump tweeted a quarantine wouldn't be necessary, rather a strong travel advisory. More and more international borders are also being sealed. Qantas is starting to wind up its overseas services. Australians trapped abroad are running out of options.
Yeah, come on, let's pack the bags.
Jared Whittaker flew out of Chile with his family today. He was told it was the last Qantas flight home.
For me, the overwhelming feeling here is just relief. We're going to get out.
The wedding they were meant to attend was cancelled. Then they spent several weeks in a military-enforced lockdown as tensions grew on the streets.
Just given that this isn't just a medical emergency, it's an economic one. If things go bad, people start dying, people start losing their jobs, there's that potential for this to really boil over into something much bigger.
There are countless other Australians trying to get home. Time is running out. David Lipson, ABC News, Washington.
New Zealand has recorded its first coronavirus death on day 4 of a nationwide lockdown. The victim, in her 70s, died in a hospital on the South Island. The World Health Organization says the coronavirus has now spread to dozens of countries in Africa where weaker health systems mean the disease poses a greater threat. South Africa has the most cases and authorities are struggling to get township residents to adhere to prevention guidelines. 49 deaths have been confirmed on the African continent from more than 2,600 cases. With their death tolls still rising sharply, Europe's worst-hit countries are preparing for extended restrictions. 10,000 people have now died in Italy, the first country to pass the grim milestone. Preparations are accelerating in the UK, with dire predictions it will soon face a similar emergency to the one on the continent. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports from London.
COVID-19 forced the Prime Minister to chair the emergency meeting on the pandemic via video link. From tomorrow, he'll also be communicating by letter, warning every British household the outbreak will get worse before it gets better, and stricter controls may have to come into force, saying, "We will not hesitate to go further if that is what the scientific and medical advice tells us we must do." Even the best-case scenario the experts are predicting sounds bleak.
If we can keep deaths below 20,000, we will have done very well in this epidemic.
It's the grim reality Britain is now preparing for. What was once a convention centre, now being transformed into a hospital. A growing fleet of ambulances at the ready. And precious testing kits are being prioritised for health workers so they can get the all clear and end self-isolation early.
That's really frustrating because I know the hospital's busy. Even at this relatively early point, things are really hotting up.
Officials say the death toll will be higher if people ignore the social distancing directives. It'll take 2 to 3 weeks for Britain to reach its peak. Then the country will know if the measures put in place have helped to slow the spread. In Italy, the disaster seems to have motivated the whole country to heed the lockdown orders. It's come too late. Italy is the first country to record 10,000 deaths from COVID-19. Spain is the second worst hit European country, with a total of 5,000 deaths. This building was meant to be part of a new Madrid legal precinct. The project was abandoned after the Great Recession. Now it's found a new purpose as a morgue. A place designed to be a grand city of justice is now a city of the dead. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
One of Australia's largest providers of meals to the elderly is under pressure to meet rising demand during the crisis. Meals on Wheels is scrambling to find more volunteers to help get meals to the thousands of elderly people now in self-isolation who are turning to the charity for help.
Wayne Doyle has been delivering food for those in need for more than a decade, and he's never been this busy.
Oh, at the moment it's tenfold. It's the busiest we've ever been. Busier than Christmas, busier than Easter.
Demand for Meals on Wheels services nationwide has surged by 50% over the past week.
Morning, Margaret.
Many of its new clients are elderly residents, like Margaret, who's gone into self-isolation at her home in Mount Druitt.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Well, you don't have to shop as much. That's one good thing, and you don't have to go out now.
It's not just meals the charity is distributing at the moment, but also household essentials like toilet paper.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Well, it's helping the country, isn't it, for us staying inside too?
But the organisation is fast becoming overwhelmed. It's not only having to manage extra orders, but it's losing many of its 76,000 volunteers. 60% of them are over the age of 70, and some are now self-isolating.
We're calling on younger Australians, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, who've got a car and a current police clearance, and we're asking those people to step up.
Meals on Wheels is essential now more than ever. The organisation is even in talks with the federal government about how it could continue its services if it were to be severely impacted by coronavirus. One option includes tapping into the Australian Defence Force to bolster its volunteer base.
The Defence Force, the hospitality sector, the hotel sector, there's a range of now people who could be available to deliver meals to people's homes and to pack them and in some cases to prepare them.
To ensure a critical service can continue to deliver. Lydia Feng, ABC News, Sydney.
Well, after years of record broadcast deals, skyrocketing salaries and unprecedented growth, experts are now warning Australian sport might never be the same again. The coronavirus has taken a huge toll on the industry, with mass layoffs this month, and is expected to worsen, with lucrative TV deals now hanging in the balance.
In the past 10 years, Australian sport has reached record highs. A $2.5 billion AFL broadcast deal from 2017 was a staggering indicator of the value of live sport, as TV executives squabbled for the right to show one of Australia's most dominant codes.
We've always believed that this is the premium code in Australia. It's the national game.
But the impact of the coronavirus crisis and the sporting shutdown that's followed,
mission complicated became mission impossible,
has led some experts to conclude that the industry is headed for difficult times.
It's a full-blown crisis. I've never seen big sports in Australia challenged as they are now.
Ballooning TV rights deals have boosted the coffers of Australian sport in recent years. This chart plots the average annual revenue of the big five domestic codes. Between 2014 and 2019 alone, the money being poured in had practically doubled before the current crisis unfolded.
If you take the big ones of AFL and Rugby League, both of them get nearly $10 million for a weekend's round of football from the television companies. They're not playing now. They can't receive that.
I don't know when it gets better. We all hope it's a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I don't know. We will continue to reassess. We'll take the advice and we'll do what we need to do to survive as an industry.
With an unknown return date and the game's key source of revenue now drying up, the codes are taking drastic measures. Athletes are being made to take significant pay cuts, while many club support staff have been stood down.
We sadly had to temporarily stand down 20 staff yesterday, which is all really difficult.
My name is Renee Gartner and I'm joined by two great Origin legends.
Tens of thousands in the sports game have been left financially stranded.
Stressed, that would probably be the one and only word that I've been using, I think. Yeah, and quite scared of how uncertain the times are. If we don't have sport coming back, like to me, that's my bread and butter. That's what I love to watch.
Many experts believe the Australian sports industry has become too reliant on broadcast revenue and is thus facing dire consequences. The National Rugby League, for example, last year booked $325 million in annualised broadcast revenue. That was 61% of the game's funding.
I think financially we've reached a peak. I think we had before the virus. I think Foxtel is in almost terminal decline now.
It's clearly going to have an impact. We don't know how big at the moment, but the passion within the Australian public to get behind their sporting teams is really strong, and it's a part of the fabric of the country, and I think that the codes will survive. What sort of an impact it will have on the cost base of those clubs and how they operate, again, too early to tell.
For an industry that thrives on drama, it appears as though there's plenty of twists and turns to come. Patrick Galloway, ABC News.
To cricket, and Steve Smith's 2-year leadership ban ended quietly today amid the coronavirus crisis. The former Australian captain is now eligible to lead Australia again at a time of uncertainty over when international cricket will resume. Smith was stripped of the captaincy and banned from leading Australia over his involvement in the 2018 ball tampering scandal in South Africa. It's unlikely he'll be called upon anytime soon, with Tim Payne now firmly established as Australia's Test captain. Before we go, a quick look at the weather around the capital cities for tomorrow. Brisbane, a shower or two clearing. Sydney, a possible storm. Melbourne, becoming dry. Canberra, showers. Partly cloudy in Hobart and Adelaide. Mostly sunny in Perth, and a sunny day ahead for Darwin. And that is the latest from ABC News. I'm Kathryn Robinson. Thanks for your company. Do stay with us. The Mix is up next.